Good morning. It's good to have you with us. Welcome back to Daily 15. Today's Daily 15 is titled Sartre on the Nature of Reflective Consciousness. And our excerpt, unsurprisingly, comes from the beginning of Sartre's masterwork, the introduction, Being and Nothingness. In our excerpt for today, Sartre discusses the relationship of consciousness to itself, the nature of self-consciousness, what it is to know what one is doing. If you want to read the text for yourself, head on over to alifeofthought.com/d15 if you want to mark it up. Or if you would like to join our community conversation, head on over to community.alifeofthought.com. Any questions, comments, or disagreements are welcome. Remember, what I say is not the final word. It's meant to be a jumping off point. Disagreement is not just welcome, it's encouraged. So, looking forward to seeing you there. Without further ado then, let's get right into today's paragraph. Paragraph 1. Great. Sartre begins, moreover, reflective consciousness posits the reflected consciousness as its object. In the act of reflection, I bring judgments to bear on my reflective consciousness. I am ashamed of it, I am proud of it, I want it, I reject it, etc. The immediate consciousness that I have of perceiving does not allow me either to judge or to want or to be ashamed. It does not know my perception or posit it. All that is intentional within my current act of consciousness is directed outward, toward the world. On the other hand, this spontaneous consciousness that I have of my perception is constitutive of my perceptual consciousness. In other words, any positional consciousness of an object is at the same time a non-positional consciousness of itself. If I count the cigarettes that are in the case, my impression is that of disclosing an objective property of this group of cigarettes. They are 12. This property appears to my consciousness as a property existing in the world. I may have no positional consciousness at all of counting them. I do not, quote-unquote, know myself as counting. Proof of this can be seen in the fact that children who are capable of spontaneous addition are unable to explain afterward how they did it. The tests by Piaget, which demonstrated this, constitute an excellent refutation of Alain's formula. To know is to know that one knows. And yet, at the moment when these cigarettes disclose themselves to me as 12, I am non-thetically conscious of my adding activity. Indeed, if I am questioned, if someone asks me, "What are you doing?" I will reply immediately, "I am counting." And my reply does not aim only at the instantaneous act of consciousness that I can reach through reflection, but also at those acts of consciousness that have passed by without being reflected on, which will forever remain unreflected in my immediate past. Thus, reflection lacks any kind of primacy in relation to reflected consciousness. It is not by means of the former that the latter is revealed to itself. On the contrary, non-reflective consciousness is what makes reflection possible. There is a pre-reflective cogito, which is the condition of the Cartesian cogito. At the same time, my non-thetic consciousness of counting is actually the condition of my activity of addition. How, if it were otherwise, could addition be the unifying theme of my acts of consciousness? In order for that theme to preside over the whole series of syntheses, of unifications, and of recognitions, it must be present to itself, not in the manner of a thing, but as an operative intention that can exist only, to use an expression of Heidegger's, as revealing revealed. Thus, in order to count, it is necessary to be conscious of counting. Good God, that was a lot. Okay. But I think there's really a lot of good stuff here, too. So let's try to make something of it. We can begin with our highlighted phrase for today. You might have missed it. It went by fast, but I think it's actually the key to this, maybe this entire paragraph. To know is to know that one knows. Okay, now this may seem an odd highlight, But this little phrase offers a crucial clue as to what on earth Sartre is getting at. Namely, it's not his position, right? It's the position he's staking out an opposition to. A bit earlier in the introduction, Sartre discusses knowing about a table. And he says, quote, "If my consciousness were not," take a drink of whatever you've got every time I say conscious. "If my consciousness were not conscious of being conscious of a table, it would thereby be conscious of the table without being conscious that it was so. Or alternatively, it would be a consciousness that did not know itself, an unconscious consciousness which is absurd." And so the thought seems to be, and this is me talking now, to be conscious is to possess almost a complex, a reflexive, and almost, I want to say, heavy kind of knowledge. And this is where the Elaine quote pops up. That to know, to sort of be conscious of, like, there's a table over there, is to also, you don't just know that there's a table over there, but you must know that you're conscious of the table. To know is to know that one knows. Now, there's, of course, a sliver of something convincing here. It's hard to imagine, at least in Sartre's picture, and don't worry, we're going to talk about Freud soon enough, that we could know of a table, that we could be conscious of a table, and yet not be, in some sense, conscious of our knowing it. There's something odd with that. I mean, of course we know that we're conscious of the table. Like, what would it be to see a table and then not be aware that you're seeing a table? But the problem, Sartre seems to imply, comes in the form of treating these two types of knowledge as the same kind of thing. I know of my seeing the table in the same mode, maybe, the same way, the same manner as I know of my consciousness of it. After all, Sartre points out, it becomes unclear how we even get started knowing anything. Because if knowing that there's a table requires us to know that we know that there's a table, well, how do we know that? It seems we need to know that we know that we know. And then it just gets confusing and, I mean, again, sort of absurd. So there must be a mistake here. What Sartre is going to want to say, at least on my reading of him, is that the mistake comes in how we're thinking about this knowledge of our own consciousness. And that brings me to today's underline. Our underlined phrase is the following. "And yet, at the moment when these cigarettes disclose themselves to me as 12, I am non-thetically conscious of my adding activity. Indeed, if I am questioned, if someone asks me, 'What are you doing?' I will respond immediately. I'm counting." This idea seems to be key for Sartre. The idea is, on the one hand, I'm not thinking of myself while I'm counting as counting. That is what we thought was heavy and complex. No, my attention is focused entirely on counting my cigarettes. What's going through my mind? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Ooh, there's dirt on that one, and so on. Yet at the same time, it isn't as if the fact that I'm counting is beyond my knowledge in any way. No, it's actually quite important to my counting that if you asked me what I'm doing, I can tell you. I don't just say 11 or 12. That would be kind of ridiculous. Rather, I can answer, I'm counting my cigarettes. And this, I think, is what Sartre is getting at when he talks about being non-thetically conscious. And though this word is sort of big and complicated, my sense is that the idea is that we are aware. We know that we're counting in a different way, a non-thetical way, from the kind of way that we know how many cigarettes we have, or the way that we know what we're looking at. And so this is supposed to, on the one hand, be a solution to the problem of how to make sense of this knowledge, right? It's still a something. We know that we're counting. But on the other hand, we don't get this weird picture where we're constantly hyper aware of what we're doing. We're never able to just simply count, but, 1, I just counted 1. 2, I just counted 2. Because, again, that would be ridiculous. It would be too demanding, and it would lead to this sort of contradiction. We wouldn't know how to get started. The last idea comes up in our circled phrase. So let's give that a read. Sartre says, at the same time, my non-thetic consciousness of counting is actually the condition of my activity of addition. I don't know if it rhymed in the original French, but if it did, that would be wonderful. But rhyming aside, this is a really cool point. So I think Sartre's idea here is that it is only because I am non-thetically conscious of what I'm doing as adding that I can be said, or that I am doing something called adding altogether. So it's only because, I can say, if you ask me, what are you doing? I can say, I'm like calculating, I'm multiplying, I'm adding. It's only because I'm able to answer that question that I'm actually doing the thing. And if there are excerpts in future Daily 15s from another philosophy book, it's titled Intention by G.E.M. Anscombe, we might see something of a similar idea, but that's the future. I digress. Anyways, this might sound odd, but when we put this idea in natural language, I think it becomes pretty compelling. What does it mean to be non-thetically conscious of myself as counting? Well, like Sartre said, if someone asks me what I am doing, I can reply immediately, I'm counting. So, to be non-thetically conscious, then, is to be able to reply in such a way when one is asked. And you don't necessarily need to be asked. I don't think the other person is deeply important for Sartre. It's just being able to sort of shift to that. Okay, good. But with all of this on the table, what we have circled then, I think, actually makes a lot of sense. So the thought goes something like this. It's only when I'm able to say what I'm doing over some string of time or when I'm able to label what I'm doing over some string of time as a certain activity, like addition, that I can be said to have been doing or be doing that activity. That's a little complicated. Let's bring it down to earth. I'm sitting on a chair in my study. I have a beautiful book in my arms, and I'm making a ton of incomprehensible sounds as I look at the page. You walk in. There are obviously a few things that might be happening here. Maybe I'm speaking in a language the book is written in that you simply don't know and it sounds unintelligible to you, or maybe I'm trying to read the book backwards. Whatever it is, you reasonably ask what I'm doing. But imagine, in response to your asking what I'm doing, I respond dumbfounded. I can't even begin to understand why you're asking such a question. And maybe I say something like, oh, I'm not doing anything. Suddenly, it seems as if all of those interpretations that once seemed perfectly consistent with my behavior, I'm speaking in another language, I'm translating, I'm reading it in reverse, fall out of harmony with it. They don't seem to fit anymore. And I think Sartre wants to say they don't seem to fit anymore because I'm not able to answer this "what are you doing?" question. Because I'm not able to sort of step back and say, well, this is what I'm doing. I'm translating, or I'm reading it backwards. Sartre's thought is I can't really be said to be doing those things if I can't step back and say that I'm doing them. Or put differently, part of what it is for me to be doing any of them is for me to be able to answer that "what are you doing?" question. I think that is what Sartre is trying to say here. Wonderful. If you have any questions, comments, and especially disagreements, head on over to community.alifeofthought.com and make them known. That is what makes all of this worth it. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and read the next paragraph to give you something to think about. And if you'd like to mark it up yourself, head on over to alifeofthought.com/D15. Sartre begins. Of course, it might be said, but that is circular. Because isn't it necessary for me to be able to be conscious of counting, that in fact I am counting in the first place? That is true. However, that does not lead to a circle, or alternatively, it is the very nature of consciousness to exist in a circle. We can express this in these terms. Any conscious existence exists as the consciousness of existing. We can understand now why the most basic consciousness of consciousness is not positional, because it and the consciousness of which it is conscious are one and the same. In a single movement, consciousness determines itself as consciousness of perception and as perception. The requirements of syntax here have obliged us up until now to talk of non-positional consciousness of self. But we cannot go on using this expression, in which the phrase of self still evokes the idea of knowledge. From now on, we will put the of between brackets to indicate that it answers only to a grammatical constraint. Any ideas what Sartre meant there? Go and write them on the paragraph yourself. Make some annotations, and have a good day. See you next time.